There are houses that not only retain memories, but also retain souls. In today's episode, you will follow Lucas, an ordinary man who moves into his dream house in the middle of a peaceful countryside, only to discover the place is not empty at all. Every wall, every mirror, every invisible footstep are all pieces leading to an untold mystery. This is not just a ghost story, but the journey of a person gradually losing himself when an ancient entity in the dark tries to step into the light. You are watching Darkness Tells, where the most real, mysterious, and creepy horror stories are recreated with vivid and haunting narration. If you love the genre of spiritual horror, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any moments that will make you shiver. Take a deep breath and prepare to step into the land of memories with no way out. Lucas Min, 28, is a freelance photographer living in the suburbs of Indiana. He is not a fan of noise, and he is not fond of the crowded high-rise apartments in the city. During many years of wandering on the roads, chasing every faint ray of light through the deep forest or the silver-grey hills at dawn, Lucas has nurtured a seemingly simple dream, a small house in the middle of nature, where he can immerse himself in the land and live according to his heartbeat. That dream gradually became more intense after a serious traffic accident last winter. Lucas miraculously survived after his car skidded off the road and plunged into an icy ditch. The accident did not kill him, but it completely changed the way he saw the world. He began to feel the fragility of life and the need for a space that truly belonged to him, not to get by, but to exist in a meaningful way. One spring evening, while browsing real estate listings as usual, Lucas came across a strange listing. An old 2-story wooden house, nestled in the middle of a 5-acre wasteland, was for sale at an impossibly low price. There were no clear photos, just a few vague lines of description. Old farmhouse, needs reviving. Absolutely quiet, not for the faint of heart. Part of him was intrigued, part of him was drawn in by the oddity of the writing. He called right away. The agent mentioned that the house had been abandoned for 3 years after the previous owner decided to leave, suddenly. No details. It felt like someone was keeping a secret. Lucas set out the next morning. When he first set foot in the place, Lucas felt something grab him from deep inside. The house stood in the middle of a vast clearing, surrounded by towering grey maples, silent as if they were waiting. The old brick stables leaned west, their roof tiles rotting and covered with moss. A small fish pond, its water murky, lay still at the foot of the hill like a mirror that reflected nothing. There was something off about the air here. It wasn't cold, it wasn't dark. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you hear the blood rushing in your ears. Lucas took a deep breath. He tried to chalk it up to the stillness, but deep down he knew it was something else. In front of the house was a pine porch, where each post had a hand-carved name. The writing faded but still recognizable. Carl and Evelyn. Inside, the furniture was dusty but intact. The ceiling was dark wood, the broad beams heavy with age. The old tiled floor creaked softly as Lucas walked across it. He stopped in the middle of the living room, looked up at the ceiling and closed his eyes. A vague picture appeared in his mind. He was sitting in an armchair, the yellow light from the reading lamp covering his shoulders, a glass of wine beside him, the wind whistling softly through the cracks in the door, and a strange feeling of warmth, as if someone was watching him from afar with a gentle smile. Lucas smiled. He had made his decision. A week later, the formalities were completed. Lucas officially became the new owner of the house. The day he received the key, the sky was unusually gloomy. Grey clouds were thick, and the wind blew fiercely across the hill. When he inserted the key into the lock and heard a click, a black crow flew by from somewhere, cawing a creepy sound. Lucas was startled and chuckled. Is this a good sign? Or is it just the effect of too many horror movies? He reassured himself. But as he pushed the door open, a blast of cold air swept across his face. So cold, it raised goosebumps on his arms. The air inside didn't smell musty, as he'd expected, but rather as if someone had just walked through, leaving behind an ancient scent of tobacco and half-burnt pine. It's probably the wind, he whispered. Lucas walked through each room, the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, all dusty with age, but still rustic in their charm. As he reached the hallway leading to the master bedroom, the floorboards gave a sudden crack, so loud that Lucas stopped short. The room was suddenly silent. No wind, no birds, no sound, except the pounding of his heart in his ears. He bent down to check where he'd stepped. Nothing. But when he looked up, he saw that the bedroom door was ajar. Though he remembered closing it when he'd passed by earlier, Lucas stepped forward, placing his hand on the doorknob. It was icy cold. He turned it gently, and as soon as it opened a little more, a faint sound echoed behind him, like footsteps on tile, slow, clear. 1, 2, 3 steps. He turned around. There was no one, just an empty hallway. Lucas swallowed, forcing a smile. I guess I imagined it. He didn't know. From that moment on, his every step, every breath was being watched. A few days later, Lucas took a selfie in front of his house. It was a picture he loved, until he looked closer at the second-floor window. There, well blurry, but clear, it was the image of a woman standing still. No eyes, no mouth, just a dark area in the shape of a human, but clearly looking straight into the lens. Lucas checked the camera carefully. No lens smudges, no lighting flaws. The picture couldn't be wrong. He deleted it. But that night, while he was sleeping, Lucas woke up to a very faint sound, a knock on the door. Each one, very slow, very soft, but regular. He opened his eyes, turned his head to look at the door. It was wide open, and the wind, from somewhere, was blowing from inside the room out. Lucas had never believed in spirituality, but from that moment, deep in his heart, he knew. He had invited something, not of this world, to live in the house. 3 days after, officially moving into the new house, Lucas decided to invite a close friend, Lam, to visit. Lam was humorous, open-minded, and extremely practical. He thought that if anyone was sober enough to help him evaluate everything objectively, it would be Lam. That afternoon the sky was gloomy. Dark clouds swirled over the hilltop. The pale yellow light was gradually swallowed by the thick fog. As soon as Lam got out of the car, he frowned. This place is too dark, man. Beautiful, but somehow cold. Lucas laughed. It must be the wind. The wind here is very strong. They walked around the house. When they entered the main door, Lam suddenly stopped. His eyes looked through the dark hallway leading to the back of the house. Is anyone else here? Lucas frowned. Just me. Lam was silent for a few seconds. I just saw a white shadow, gliding across the end of the hallway. Lucas stiffened. He hadn't told Lam about the photo, the knocking, or the strange wind. But now someone else had seen it, and said the same thing he'd felt. Are you sure? Lucas asked, his voice dry. Lam nodded. Very sure. A figure, but faint, and moving silently. The house suddenly felt heavy. It felt like the air had been sucked out, leaving a nameless, dense void. Lucas felt his heart beat faster. Sweat beaded on the back of his neck. They walked into the kitchen. Everything was eerily quiet. The wind whistled softly through the half-open window, creating a sound like a distant whisper. "Have you ever seen anything strange?" Lamb asked, tapping his hand lightly on the wooden table. Lucas was about to deny it, but he stopped. Something inside him wanted to be honest. "I have the feeling that someone lives here, but it's not a person." Lamb looked at him, serious. "I felt it too, right from the moment I walked in." At that moment, bang! A loud noise came from upstairs, like someone had just hit the floor hard. Both of them jumped. Lucas rushed up the stairs, his heart pounding. Lamb followed closely behind, but when they got there, everything was completely empty. The bedroom door was ajar. The wind blew from inside, causing the curtains to flutter slightly. On the floor, amidst the fine dust, was a bare footprint, small, slender, like a woman's, but printed in the opposite direction, as if someone had stepped back into the darkness. Lucas knelt down, touching the footprint. Cold. Lamb stood behind him, holding his chest. "I'm not joking anymore. This place, something's wrong." Lucas nodded slightly. For the first time, he no longer wanted to reassure anyone. He couldn't reassure himself either. That night, Lamb left early. Lucas was alone. It was raining lightly. Drops of water fell on the porch roof, creating a steady rhythm, like a knock on the door from afar. Lucas sat in the living room. The yellow light was weak. He turned on the computer, intending to review the photos taken that day when the light flickered once. He looked up. The electricity was still on, but the bulb kept dimming and then brightening, as if someone was adjusting the current to his breathing. Suddenly, the laptop screen went black. Lucas touched it. It was hot. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closed, hand on his chest to keep his heart from beating too fast. Clank! A dry sound rang out from the kitchen. Lucas opened his eyes. He stood up, walking slowly towards the sound. The floor tiles groaned under each step. He stopped in front of the kitchen door. Nothing. Everything was the same. He turned around and the refrigerator door was wide open. There was no wind. No force was strong enough to open it. Lucas froze. He stepped back, closing the door. But as his hand left the handle, it opened again. No sound, no shaking. Just opened. Lucas stepped back. "I don't know who you are," he whispered. "But if this is your home, I'm not here to destroy it. I just want to live in peace." A long silence. Then, the door slowly closed. Lucas stood there, his hands still shaking, his eyes wide. For the first time, he felt like he was more than just a tenant. He was a stranger in his own home. That night he couldn't sleep. His eyes were wide open, listening to every tiny crack that echoed from the ceiling, the wooden walls, the floor, as if the house was whispering in its own language. Around 2 a.m., he vaguely heard the sound of a chair hair being pulled out from the kitchen. Once, then again. Clink, clink. The sound of someone moving the table and chairs to prepare to sit down to eat. Lucas gathered his courage, turned on the flashlight, and walked downstairs. He had just reached the foot of the stairs when the kitchen ceiling light suddenly turned on brightly, then went out. In the flickering light of the flashlight, he saw the wooden chair being pulled away from the table, just as he had heard. But there was no one. At that moment, The basement door swung open with a bang. A blast of cold air hit his face. The smell of mold, decay, and blood. Very faint, but enough to make him gag. From the darkness of the basement, a whisper rang out. "Back off!" Lucas slammed the door shut, locked it, and ran upstairs as if he were being chased. He felt his heart pounding like a drum. He curled up on the sofa, covering his face with the blanket, his eyes wide open, staring at the stairs. That was the first night he truly believed. He wasn't alone. Lucas had always believed that if he wanted to dispel the feeling of gloom, all he needed was people and light. So, after more than a week of living alone, amid inexplicable events, he decided to throw a small party at home to dispel the heavy atmosphere. The guest list was not long. Just a few old friends, a few colleagues who took pictures, and especially Thao, his ex-girlfriend who had become his best friend, someone Lucas had always felt comfortable around. Thao came with a new friend, a girl named Lai and her boyfriend, a quiet man named Quan, whom Lucas had never met. That afternoon, the sun set early. A thick fog covered the land around the house. But inside the house, it was warm. Yellow lights were bright. Laughter rang out along with the smell of wine and food. Everyone gathered around the fireplace, chatting, playing soft music and sipping red wine. Lucas felt relieved. Maybe just like this, with people, with voices, everything would be fine. But then he noticed the man named Quan, Lai's boyfriend, had barely eaten, drank, or smiled since arriving. His eyes kept looking around the house, especially the hallway behind the kitchen, where Lucas had heard the knocking, where he had seen the door open by itself. That look wasn't curious, but wary, as if he was listening for something only he could feel. Near midnight, when everyone was gathered in the living room talking, Quan approached Lucas, standing so close that Lucas felt a chill down his spine. "How long have you lived here?" His voice was low, even, as if it had no emotion. Lucas was a little surprised. "About 2 weeks. Have you heard them?" Lucas paused. "Who?" "The ones who haven't left yet." Lucas smiled awkwardly. "Are you kidding?" Quan didn't smile. His eyes didn't blink. "I'm not kidding. They don't want you here, and they're letting you know it." The air froze. Lucas felt his throat dry. "I don't understand." "They're the real owners of this place," Quan whispered. "And you walked in uninvited." Before Lucas could react, Quan turned away and quietly walked out the door. Lai ran after him, muttering an apology. Lucas stood there, in the middle of the room filled with music and voices, but suddenly felt completely lost. The lights seemed to have turned yellow. The laughter seemed to shatter in his ears. After the guests had left, Lucas cleaned up alone. The night was deep. The wind outside was blowing fiercely, making the glass doors rattle. The clock struck 1 a.m., but the house was still lit. Lucas felt like something was still there, a feeling like he had just been awakened, unable to fall back asleep. He gathered the trash from the dining room, then suddenly stopped in the middle of the hallway. A sound echoed in the absolute silence. Someone crying. So faint, so distant, but so real. He stepped out into the hallway. The crying was gone. Instead, there was a light scratching on the wall. From behind the basement door. Lucas grabbed the doorknob. It didn't open. He'd never locked it. Had it been locked? Or had someone locked it from inside? At that moment, all the lights in the house went out. No warning, no sound, just absolute darkness. Lucas gasped. He pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, but the screen just flashed. and then went black. Out of battery. He stood there alone in the absolute darkness. Just the sound of his heartbeat and footsteps from upstairs. A step. A pause. Another step. Lucas backed away, step by step, until his back hit the dining table. His hands shook, his heart pounding so hard it almost broke. Boom! A hammering sound rang out from the ground floor. The whole house shook. Glass fell from the kitchen counter and shattered at his feet. The air became thick, hard to breathe. Lucas ran toward the front door. Locked. He didn't remember locking it. His hand shook as he tried to turn the key, but it didn't work. The door seemed to be held from the outside. A soft laugh sounded behind him. Close. Very close. He turned his head and saw nothing. But the air around him was cold enough to send a chill down his spine. The wind, from the hallway behind the kitchen, began to blow back. The window was open, though he remembered locking it. On the wall, a line of words, at some point, appeared in a blur, as if written in ash. This is not your house. Lucas backed away, unable to form words. The wind blew so hard that the chandelier swayed. Then, everything stopped. The lights came back on. Everything was quiet. Lucas collapsed to the floor, his hands shaking, his eyes blurred. He felt like he had survived some dark storm, and only he knew it had happened. The next morning, Lucas checked everywhere. No writing on the walls, no broken doors. Everything, as if nothing had ever happened. No one but him could feel the slightest change in the space. He called Thao. She said Quan was a special person. She had never seen him react like last night. He is sensitive to places where people have not left. If he says so, you should believe it. Lucas hung up. He looked around his house. Once a dream, now an unanswered question. And in that quiet moment, as the wind blew gently through the trees behind him, he heard a whisper. Somewhere in the wind. Get out of here, before it's too late. This time, he wasn't sure if it was the wind or an actual voice. But the only thing Lucas knew for sure was, this house was not welcoming. After the housewarming party, the house seemed to enter a different state. Not loud, not violent, but an eerie silence, like the unnatural calm before a storm. Lucas began to notice small details. At first, it was just a feeling. Every time he walked down the hallway, he felt someone walking behind him. Lightly, very lightly but steadily. Even when he turned around, the hallway was still empty. The wind wasn't blowing as hard as before. But every time he walked from the living room to the kitchen, he always felt a cold breeze pass over his face, as if someone had just stepped out from behind a wall. One morning, while making coffee, Lucas caught a whiff of a strong scent, like a classic aftershave, the kind that was pungent and strong, like it came from the 50s. It didn't come from the bathroom. It didn't come from any bottle. It just appeared and then disappeared. But the strange thing was, every time the scent appeared, Lucas felt he was not alone. Sometimes he stood in the kitchen, smelled it, turned around, and saw a shadow pass by the kitchen mirror. Just in the blink of an eye. There was no clear shape, just a deep darkness, like a void without light. Lucas began to take notes. He wrote a diary every day. Time, location, sounds, smells, unexplained phenomena. And the scary thing was, everything became cyclical. The scent often appeared at dawn or just after dusk. The voice, whispering, echoing in the hallway, was most audible at 3 a.m. Once, while lying in bed reading, Lucas suddenly felt the air in the room become stuffy, He put the book down, was about to get up to turn off the light, when the light went out before his hand touched the switch. In the darkness, a very small laugh rang out right next to his ear. Lucas could not see anyone, but he felt their breathing. He turned on the bedside lamp, but it didn't come on. The entire electrical system was still working, except for that one light bulb. And then another scent appeared, the scent of dry pollen, like an old lady's bedroom. The scent brought back strange memories that made his skin crawl. He remembered what Quan had said. They don't want you here. Maybe there was more than one they. Maybe this house was home to more than one spirit. And they were starting to speak. The climax came one afternoon, when light streamed through the living room window. Lucas was editing photos when he heard music. It wasn't clear, but it sounded like an old radio playing classic jazz. He looked around. Nothing was on. The music was coming from inside the wall. He pressed his ear to the wall and heard a man's voice. "Evelyn, can you hear that? Are you still here with me?" Lucas recalled, his face pale. He didn't know who Evelyn was, but that night, when he checked some old documents for the name of the person who had lived there, he found a match. Evelyn was the name of the deceased wife of Carl, the previous owner who had built the house. Boom! A hammering sound rang out from the ground floor. The whole house shook. Glass fell from the kitchen counter and shattered at his feet. The air became thick, hard to breathe. Lucas ran toward the front door. Locked. He didn't remember locking it. His hand shook as he tried to turn the key, but it didn't work. The door seemed to be held from the outside. A soft laugh sounded behind him. Close. Very close. He turned his head and saw nothing. But the air around him was cold enough to send a chill down his spine. The wind, from the hallway behind the kitchen, began to blow back. The window was open, though he remembered locking it. On the wall, a line of words, at some point, appeared in a blur, as if written in ash. "This is not your house." Lucas backed away, unable to form words. The wind blew so hard that the chandelier swayed. Then, everything stopped. The lights came back on. Everything was quiet. Lucas collapsed to the floor, his hands shaking, his eyes blurred. He felt like he had survived some dark storm, and only he knew it had happened. The next morning, Lucas checked everywhere. No writing on the walls, no broken doors. Everything, as if nothing had ever happened. No one but him could feel the slightest change in the space. He called Thao. She said Quan was a special person. She had never seen him react like last night. He is sensitive to places where people have not left. If he says so, you should believe it. Lucas hung up. He looked around his house. Once a dream, now an unanswered question. And in that quiet moment, as the wind blew gently through the trees behind him, he heard a whisper. Somewhere in the wind. "Get out of here, before it's too late." This time, he wasn't sure if it was the wind or an actual voice. But the only thing Lucas knew for sure was, this house was not welcoming. After the housewarming party, the house seemed to enter a different state. Not loud, not violent, but an eerie silence, like the unnatural calm before a storm. Lucas began to notice small details. At first, it was just a feeling. Every time he walked down the hallway, he felt someone walking behind him. Lightly, very lightly but steadily. Even when he turned around, the hallway was still empty. The wind wasn't blowing as hard as before. But every time he walked from the living room to the kitchen, he always felt a cold breeze pass over his face. as if someone had just stepped out from behind a wall. One morning, while making coffee, Lucas caught a whiff of a strong scent, like a classic aftershave, the kind that was pungent and strong, like it came from the 50s. It didn't come from the bathroom. It didn't come from any bottle. It just appeared and then disappeared. But the strange thing was, every time the scent appeared, Lucas felt he was not alone. Sometimes he stood in the kitchen, smelled it, turned around, and saw a shadow pass by the kitchen mirror. Just in the blink of an eye. There was no clear shape, just a deep darkness, like a void without light. Lucas began to take notes. He wrote a diary every day. Time, location, sounds, smells, unexplained phenomena. And the scary thing was, everything became cyclical. The scent often appeared at dawn or just after dusk. The voice, whispering, echoing in the hallway, was most audible at 3 a.m. Once, while lying in bed reading, Lucas suddenly felt the air in the room become stuffy. He put the book down, was about to get up to turn off the light, when the light went out before his hand touched the switch. In the darkness, a very small laugh rang out right next to his ear. Lucas could not see anyone, but he felt their breathing. He turned on the bedside lamp, but it didn't come on. The entire electrical system was still working, except for that one light bulb. And then another scent appeared, the scent of dry pollen, like an old lady's bedroom. The scent brought back strange memories that made his skin crawl. He remembered what Quan had said. They don't want you here. Maybe there was more than one they. Maybe this house was home to more than one spirit. And they were starting to speak. The climax came one afternoon, when light streamed through the living room window. Lucas was editing photos when he heard music. It wasn't clear, but it sounded like an old radio playing classic jazz. He looked around. Nothing was on. The music was coming from inside the wall. He pressed his ear to the wall and heard a man's voice. "Evelyn, can you hear that? Are you still here with me?" Lucas recalled, his face pale. He didn't know who Evelyn was. But that night, when he checked some old documents for the name of the person who had lived there, he found a match. Evelyn was the name of the deceased wife of Carl, the previous owner who had built the house. Another night, Lucas was awakened by the sound of a door opening. He lived alone. The door was locked. But there was clearly a sound of a latch sliding open. He sat up, breathing hard. The nightlight was still on, but it was unusually quiet. He walked out of the room, down the hallway, and when he reached the door to the bedroom opposite, it opened automatically in front of him. No wind, no loose latch, just a dark void. Lucas stood still. He felt something standing in that darkness. An invisible force. A presence watching. He stepped back, about to turn away, when the door slammed behind him, so hard that the walls shook. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He lay on the sofa, eyes fixed on the ceiling, ears listening for the slightest sound. At 4 a.m., a sound like a metal spoon hitting the floor echoed in the kitchen. He went downstairs, carrying a flashlight. On the table was a spoon, cold, covered in dust, in the middle of the dining table. He had never used it. He didn't even know where it came from. After many sleepless and haunted nights, Lucas decided to install night vision cameras. He placed one in the living room, one in the hallway, and one right in front of the master bedroom door. The next morning, he reviewed the first footage. The hallway video started normally. The hallway light flickered, something he was used to. But around 3:17 a.m., the camera picked up a white blur that passed across the lens. No head, no legs, just a moving patch of light. And after it passed, the entire frame went blurry, as if covered in a layer of frost. From the living room camera, 3:22 a.m., the ceiling light sways slightly, even though there is no wind. Then, the armchair where Lucas usually sits slowly turns slightly, as if someone has just sat down. Lucas shudders at the end. From the hallway, a whisper close to the camera microphone. "I'm still here." He hangs up. His heart is beating like a drum. He no longer doubts. This house, once a dream, is now a living entity. An old body filled with an unliberated soul. Every wall, every door, every breath of wind has a trace of voices, and they are no longer whispering. They are screaming in silence. After the long sleepless nights, Lucas gradually learned to be silent to the invisible sounds around him. Not because he was no longer afraid, but because fear had taken root, grown into a second layer of skin on his body. A kind of defensive silence, as if he and the house were living in a reluctant coexistence. But then, it was the sound that broke that balance. One gloomy afternoon, while Lucas was editing photos at his desk, he suddenly heard music coming from downstairs. At first, he thought it was the wind chimes on the porch, but it wasn't. The melody was clearly an old organ, a ringing, lingering sound like it came from a funeral in the last century. He walked down the stairs, each step matching the music. When he reached the middle of the stairs, the music suddenly stopped, as if it knew he was listening. The air was thick. The smell of damp wood and something like old incense made him frown. Lucas walked into the living room. Nothing. Everything was strangely quiet. He turned away, but as soon as he stepped out of the living room doorway, the music started again, louder this time, closer, right behind him. Lucas jerked back in surprise, but still nothing. The old radio he had picked up from the attic lay quietly on the shelf, unplugged, without batteries. But the music was clearly coming from there. He tiptoed over, reached out to touch the radio. Bang! A door from upstairs slammed loudly. Lucas jumped, almost dropping the radio. Upon the second floor, the bedroom door was wide open, the curtains fluttering despite the lack of wind. On the floor, an old piece of paper was rolled up, as if it had just been thrown from somewhere. Lucas picked it up. It was a manuscript, the ink faded, filled with diary entries. Handwriting shaky. "I can't sleep anymore. Carl still comes home every night. He stands at the door, doesn't say anything, just looks. I hear him walking in the hallway, even though he died 4 days ago." Another line below. They whisper in my ear. "Evelyn, Evelyn, why don't you follow them?" Lucas looked up. The room suddenly became cold, his breath forming a mist in front of him. A dark shadow passed by the door, just for a moment, but it was enough to almost freeze him. From that day on, the manuscripts appeared more often. In the kitchen drawer, between the bookshelves, under the living room rug. They were all scattered notes, unsigned, but they all had the same desperate tone. "I don't know how many days it is. The light doesn't come into this house anymore. The music never stops. They won't let me sleep. There's something in the basement. It looks at me every time I open the door. I hear a baby crying, but there's no baby in this house." Lucas tried to record the music every time it played, but the recording only recorded static. The camera always lost signal every time the music appeared. There was no doubt. The house was actively hiding what it wanted to keep. One night, while dozing in his chair, Lucas was awakened by the sound of a piano. Exactly 3 notes. Do, la, fa, over and over again. It was as if someone was calling someone's name, in sound rather than words. He tiptoed downstairs, his footsteps echoing twice as loud in the silence. In the living room, where the old radio had been, there was now a piano that he had never brought home. Lucas froze. His fingers trembled as he touched the piano. Dust. Cold wood. No key stuck. Suddenly, 3 notes sounded again, right in front of him, untouched. Lucas backed away, panicked. The room lights flickered on and off. Once again the wind rose. From within the room itself, as if someone was walking around him, invisible but present. He ran upstairs, hid in his room, shut the door, his heart pounding like it was going to explode. But then, the music sounded again. Not from downstairs. From his room. He turned around. The nightlight went out. The air was suffocatingly cold, and in the darkness he heard a whisper. It's not you. It's not real. The next morning, he found the final draft, lying in the middle of the kitchen floor, next to an old dusty spoon. I broke a taboo. I touched a room I shouldn't have. Carl warned me. Evelyn wasn't the only one here. Lucas read the last line. Someone's pretending to be me. He dropped the paper, his whole body going cold. In the kitchen mirror, there was a reflection of himself standing, and another figure standing close behind him. He turned around. No one. But from then on, every time Lucas looked in the mirror, the reflection was always a half-second late, as if something was learning to become him. And sometimes, the reflection smiled when he wasn't smiling. After discovering the final draft with the chilling words, "Someone is pretending to be me," Lucas knew he couldn't go on alone. The feeling of being invaded, not only physically, but also mentally, became so haunting that he couldn't sleep. He decided to seek out the only person who had warned him from the beginning, Quan. Quan was not surprised when Lucas told him everything. The drafts, the music, the distorted mirror. He pondered for a long time, then pulled out of his pocket something Lucas had never seen before. An old, yellowed photo of the current house, but from more than 40 years ago. In the photo was a couple, Carl and Evelyn, with their 4 children. Everyone stood on the porch, their faces solemn, but what made Lucas shiver was, on the right side of the photo, in a corner of the wall, there was a blurry figure. His face was unclear, but his hand was reaching behind Evelyn's head, as if holding her from the darkness. Quan spoke slowly. Carl used to be a very religious man. He built this house by hand, lived in the basement for 3 years with his family to save money. But then Evelyn died suddenly. No illness, no accident, just dead. And from then on, Carl began to change. Lucas felt his heart tighten. There are rumors that Carl tried to contact his wife using an ancient ritual, a forbidden ritual. They say he used tears, blood, and personal items to call her back. But what came back was no longer Evelyn. Quan looked straight into Lucas's eyes. He thought he was talking to Evelyn, but in fact, it was another entity, using her memories to survive. And from that day on, their children began to disappear. Lucas choked. Disappeared? Nobody found the body. No one heard the screams. But the neighbors said, every time there was music coming from this house, there was one less child the next morning. Lucas felt a chill down his spine. The cold seemed to penetrate his bones. Quan offered to accompany Lucas back to the house at dusk. According to him, spirits were most visible at the hour between day and night. As soon as they entered, the atmosphere changed. The smell of dust, incense, and the smell Lucas was familiar with, old-fashioned aftershave, all came rushing in. "We shouldn't stay too long," Kwan said. "Just find the room with the original." "The original?" "It's the real diary, Carl's. If we find it, we might know how to end it all." They made their way to the attic, a place Lucas had never dared to touch since moving in. The attic door was old and warped, locked with a rusty lock. But as Lucas touched the handle, the lock swung open. Inside was a narrow, dark space, covered with cobwebs. But in the far corner, covered in a white cloth like mourning clothes, was a wooden chest. Lucas opened it. Inside were old objects, a cracked picture frame, a bunch of grey hair, a few scraps of paper, and a dark brown leather notebook, locked with a brass clasp. He opened the notebook. The first line was in neat handwriting. "The Diary of Carl M. de Vaughan, the nights after Evelyn's death." The first pages were the heartbreaking confessions of a husband who had lost his wife. But as the pages progressed, the writing became twisted and difficult to read. Sentences repeated themselves. Some were crossed out. Some had just 2 words. "Not her." The last page was torn in half. But there was the ending. "If anyone reads this, don't talk to anyone who calls your name at 3 a.m. Don't look in the mirror for too long. And if you hear music, don't follow it." Lucas closed the book. But when he looked up, he saw that Kwan was no longer in the room. He called out. No response. Lucas rushed downstairs. The downstairs was pitch black. The lights were off. And in the darkness, he saw Kwan standing in the middle of the hallway. His back was to Lucas. "Kwan!" he shouted. "Found anything?" No answer. Lucas moved closer, his heart pounding. "Kwan!" The figure slowly turned around. But there was no face. Just a flat patch of skin, smooth as candle wax. And then a long slit smile from ear to ear broke out across that patch of skin. Lucas screamed and rushed out of the house, carrying the diary still warm in his hands, as if it had just been written. Lucas ran without looking back. The night wind whipped at his face, cold as a knife. In his hand was Carl's diary. Not just evidence, but a key to an uncharted abyss. Back in town, Lucas stayed in a small motel on the side of the highway. The room was simple, but had windows facing west, where the lonely moonlight filtered through the white curtains like a floating mourning cloth. He placed the diary on the table, turned on the light, and read it all over again. This time without missing a single line. And that's when the old writing began to change. Below each paragraph, new ink appeared, as if it had been written as he looked. "Don't go back to that house. He's watching you." Lucas jumped to his feet, his chair falling to the floor. The room suddenly felt cold, as if someone had opened a window. But the door was still closed, not a crack, not a breath of wind, no sign of life. Except for him. He turned his head to the mirror. His reflection was still sitting there. Lucas was stunned. He looked at himself, then back at the mirror. The reflection looked up, met his eyes, and smiled. Not his smile. Not the eyes of a living person. The next morning, Lucas went to the town library. He searched every record of the de Vaughan family. In a local newspaper from 1979, he found a short article. "Farmhouse abandoned. Owner missing without trace." The police had investigated, but every member of the de Vaughan family had disappeared in the same week. There was no sign of a struggle. No body. And most importantly, no one in the area remembered hearing screams, even though the disappearances had occurred on clear days. Lucas took a picture of the article, his hands shaking. The hidden truth gradually emerged, like a layer of dust being swept away from an old mirror. On the way back, he realized he was not alone. In the rearview mirror, as he turned the corner near the pine hill, he saw a figure in a long cloak, standing in the middle of the road. Head bowed, hair loose, face unclear. Lucas stepped on the brakes, but when he got out to check, no one was there. Not a single footprint in the sand. No sound, just a familiar smell. Dry pollen and ash. He turned back to the car, tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't start. Every time he turned the key, he heard a screech, like someone whispering very close to his ear, "Don't leave!" Finally, after a few minutes of struggling, the car started. Lucas sped away, leaving behind him the howling of the shapeless wind. That night, in the hotel, Lucas was awakened by a howl from outside the window. Not human, not animal. It was like the sound of a soul being torn apart in midair. He dashed out onto the balcony. There was no moon. The fog was as thick as a death blanket. And in the fog, figures standing still, motionless, headed towards his room. No faces, no movement. Just standing there, as if waiting for a signal to rush in. Lucas slammed the door, drew the curtains, turned on all the lights in the room. But the lights flickered immediately. Bulbs exploded. 1, 2, then all. In the darkness, a wheezing sound came from behind him. He turned. No one. But on the bathroom mirror, in something like ashen blood, appeared a line. "Go back. Put the notebook back where it came from." Lucas understood. If he didn't go back to that house, it wouldn't stop. It wouldn't just hunt him. It might start with someone else. Like Carl, like Evelyn, like the children. He couldn't let it go on. The next morning, Lucas drove back to the farmhouse alone. It was raining. Not hard, but heavy. Like tears falling from the sky for something that was about to end. The door to the house was open, as if waiting. No music, no footsteps. But the air was more suffocating than ever. Lucas entered, diary in hand. He headed straight for the attic, but as soon as he stepped onto the first step, the stairs let out a painful groan, like the sound of breaking bones. Upstairs, the door of an old wooden chest swung open by itself. A strong wind blew from somewhere, causing the white cloth covering the chest to fly up to the ceiling, swirling like a small tornado. Lucas placed the diary in the chest, but as soon as he let go, all the lights in the house turned on brightly and then went out. The attic shook. Banging noises, screams, children crying, women laughing. It all rang out at once, as if every soul that had ever been trapped in the house was struggling to rise. Lucas was knocked back, hitting his back against the wall. For a split second he saw Evelyn. Not old, not young, just a pale face with empty black eyes. She didn't smile, but tears were streaming down her face. She reached out, not to pull Lucas, but to push him away. He rolled down the stairs. The front door swung open. The wind blew him out. And when Lucas looked up, the house was on fire. There was no reason, no electrical short. It just burned itself out. From the flames, figures emerged. Children, people, as if released. One of them stepped closer, put a hand on Lucas's shoulder. A warmth spread her through the skin, for the first time in months. And finally, Lucas saw Carl, standing there, silent, nodding at him before dissolving into smoke. Behind him was Quan, or whatever had once been his form. Now a faint shadow, then gone. 3 days after the house burned down, Lucas still hadn't left town. He sat alone in his small rented room, his eyes glued to the window where he could see far away, where the columns of smoke once rose, threatening to tear the sky. He thought it was all over. The spirits had been freed. The house had collapsed as Evelyn had wished. But the silence did not bring peace. It was just a black cloth covering another door, deeper, darker. Every night, Lucas still couldn't sleep. He dreamed, or thought he dreamed, that the house was still standing, unburned, undamaged. And he himself, not looking from the outside, but standing inside. Some nights, he woke up and realized his feet were covered in mud, sand, moss, the damp soil that only surrounded the old house's foundation. He began to doubt his own reality. Dreams no longer existed only in the night. They crept into every waking moment, every glance reflected off the glass. On the fourth day, Lucas returned to the scene. The floor was a pile of ash. The walls were charred and jagged. The trees around him had been toppled, as if they had been through a storm. Lucas walked slowly, each step like stepping on memories. It felt like he was stepping on the corpse of a living, breathing creature. As he approached the remains of the basement, he saw something strange. A mirror, unbroken, unburned, standing tall in the black ground. He stepped closer. No reflection. No image appeared. Only a dull grey, like a mist hiding something on the other side of the glass. Lucas raised his hand, and the mirror rippled. It wasn't a mirror. It was a door. He stepped back, his heart pounding. In that moment, a cold gust of air blew out, and someone called his name. Lucas. Turn back to us. A polyphonic echo, mixed with men, women, children, like a choir from hell. He rushed out of the grounds, not looking back. But that night, when he looked in the hotel bathroom mirror, he saw ash on his shoulder. He had clearly changed his clothes. He had clearly not touched anything. The sound of water dripping from the sink was uneven. Splash, 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 then suddenly stopped. He turned to leave when the bathroom door slammed shut behind him. The light went out. In the darkness, whispers rang out from all sides. Don't think fire can burn shadows. Lucas pounded on the door. After a few minutes of struggling, the light came back on. The door opened. But when he looked in the mirror, the reflection did not follow him. He stepped outside. His reflection in the mirror remained still, expressionless, eyes wide open. Then it grinned, a smile that stretched from ear to ear. He called Thao. What did you say Kwan saw in the house? Thao was silent for a long time. Then she said, he said there was an entity without a name, without a form. It existed in the cracks, in what was forgotten. It didn't die with the house, because it didn't live in the usual way. Lucas gripped the phone. His hands were sweaty. He said, if someone touched the diary, it would follow him forever. Lucas looked toward the table, where the notebook Carl had written in was still in his backpack, ash still covering the edges of the paper. A faint mist rose from the cover, as if it were breathing. When he rewinded the video, the image stopped at a single frame. His face was blurred. No eyes, no mouth. From that day on, Lucas never left the house again. Or at least, the thing that bears his name no longer comes into the light. Neighbors said they still heard the TV from his room every night. But the news always repeated the same phrase. He's learning. He's replacing. He's becoming. A delivery man said that when he stood at the door, he heard knocking from behind the wood. as if someone was locked inside the wall. The building manager tried to check, but when he entered the room, everything was too clean, too quiet, as if no one had ever lived there. Thao turned to look for Lucas. She couldn't reach him, couldn't bear the guilt of leaving him alone. She knocked. No answer. But when she turned to leave, the door opened. Lucas, or someone who looked like him, stood there smiling. But his eyes didn't blink. His movements were slow as a robot. The apartment was dark, not a single light. "Are you okay?" Thao asked, trembling. "I'm fine. Lucas is fine," the voice replied, evenly. She stepped back. "Where is Lucas?" The person stared at her, then slowly raised his hand, pointing at the mirror in the living room. In it, reflected a person screaming, hitting the mirror with his hands, making no sound. The person in the mirror was wearing the exact same clothes Lucas had worn the day he burned down the house. Hands were bloody. Eyes were wet with tears. But his mouth was still tightly closed, as if someone had taken away his right to speak. The man Thao met that day never texted back, never called, and never showed up again. The next day, Thao went to the police station to report her friend's strange disappearance. But Lucas's case had been closed 2 weeks ago. "No way," she said. "I just saw him last night." The police looked at her suspiciously. "No one lives there. The lease ended 10 days ago. The landlord cleaned everything out." Thao turned back to the apartment. The door was locked. The locks were new. But in the darkness behind the glass door, she swore she saw a pair of eyes, unemotional, looking out. Eyes that didn't blink. Eyes that didn't look, but that made it impossible to look away. At the same time, a video began circulating online. The last clip Lucas had ever recorded. The video was blurry. The sound was distorted. But everyone who watched it felt like something was wrong. The person in the video sits motionless in front of the camera, doesn't speak, just looks. But the eyes seem to know you're looking back. At times, the eyes change position, shift from their sockets, then return to normal as if they had never deviated. And when the video ends, the screen goes black, but doesn't turn off. The viewer's face is reflected in it, and for a split second, they see someone else standing behind them. The silhouette is unclear, but the face is pale. No eyebrows, no mouth. Just a smudged smile as if drawn with the left hand. A podcast dedicated to paranormal stories received an anonymous email. "My name is Lucas. I used to live in a farmhouse where darkness didn't need a reason to exist. I'm not writing this to be believed. I'm writing it to remember, because I'm forgetting who I am. If you read this, stay away from mirrors. Don't listen to music at 3 a.m. And if someone smiles at you, but doesn't blink, don't reply, because it might have been me." After the email, the podcast aired a special episode. The Soul in the Mirror, the story of the replaced. Thousands of listeners. Half of them reported that they had the same dream the next night. In their dream, they saw a burning house in the middle of the wilderness. There was a person standing in the doorway, his back turned. Each time he got closer, he slowly turned his head, but never fully turned his face. Someone said, "I saw him turn his face like a mask. Underneath there was nothing but a dark area oozing blood." Only when the dreamer woke up with a start, they saw a handprint in the mirror in their room. Some even saw that handprint on the inside of the mirror. Thao lost contact with everyone in the old group. Those who had entered the house that day gradually had accidents, depression, insomnia, or disappeared. a friend in the group hanged himself. On the wall was a line of blood. I am no longer in the mirror. Finally, Thao decided to leave town. Before leaving, she returned to the old land, where the house used to be, now overgrown with grass. But in the middle of the grass there was a mirror standing upright. No dust, no moss. In it did not reflect her, but Lucas. Lucas was sitting writing in a familiar room. He looked up, looking at her, and smiled. A sad, painful, and desperate smile. The room behind him was dark, and in the darkness, hundreds of other figures stood still, facing the wall. Thao ran away, but in the years that followed, every time she passed a mirror, she always felt like someone was looking back. Not her anymore. And one night, she woke up at 3 a.m. The room lights were off. The TV was on by itself. On the screen, a video of Lucas. But this time, Lucas looked straight at her and whispered, "I'm inside." She smashed the TV. But from the broken screen, black smoke rose. A skinny hand reached out and then disappeared into the howling wind. The last word. No one knows what really happened to Lucas. Some people think he was mentally ill, creating everything himself. Others believe the house contains something indescribable, a living memory that can infect people like a virus. Others believe that Lucas was not replaced, but chose to stay, to contain what was trying to find its way out. What remains are fragments, broken videos, unsent emails, false reflections in mirrors, and a question. If one day you looked in the mirror and saw yourself smiling, but you weren't, what would you do? Lucas, was he truly consumed by the darkness, or did he choose to trade his soul to imprison the thing that was trying to escape? In the end, no one can be sure. We are left with only traces, knocks in the night, videos no one took, and mirrors that don't reflect the truth. Do you ever shiver when you look in the mirror at night? Have you ever seen your eyes looking back at you? But something seems wrong? Something is learning to imitate you. Every expression, every gesture, every whisper in your head when you think you are alone. Lucas's story is more than just an urban legend or a supernatural phenomenon. It is a warning that there are doors in life that, if you open them, you can never close them. It could be a house, an ancient object, a curious ritual, or simply a misplaced mirror. The scariest thing of all is not the ghost, but the loss of yourself without even knowing it. Like Lucas, step by step, habit by habit, memory by memory, gradually replaced by something else. And by the time he realized it, he was on the other side of the mirror. So, if you hear whispers when you are alone, if something in your house is out of place, if you feel a chill down your spine when your eyes meet your own in the mirror, remember this story. And if you're still here, still yourself, then hold on to that. Protect your memories. Protect yourself. Because sometimes, the only thing that separates us from the abyss is the belief that we are still human. Thank you for joining Darkness, Tales on this dark journey. If you find this story chilling, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to motivate us to bring you even more scary stories. See you, if you're still yourself, in the next video. The end.